Hi, it's me. Number 10. The Italian Connection. The Stonehenge builders may have had connections to ancient Italy, according to recent DNA analysis of the skeletons found at the site in 2021. The bones were discovered in what researchers are calling an elite burial. They date back 4,500 years and belong to a man in his mid-30s and a boy about 12 years old. Their bones were discovered buried together with an axe made from the tooth of a narwhal, a type of whale that lives in Arctic waters. It's incredibly rare for such remains to be found in southern England, which means the people who brought them there must have traveled a very long way. Analysis revealed that the younger skeleton belonged to the first person in Britain to have blue eyes. The team also uncovered some other interesting details thanks to isotope analysis of the skeletons. The man's bones showed that he ate lots of seafood and shellfish, while the boy's diet consisted mainly of milk and meat from domesticated animals. This suggests that the younger boy was weaned much earlier than average. He had a special diet to keep him strong and healthy. It's important to remember that this is just a tiny sample size. But it does seem to indicate that there was significant gene flow between populations around the Mediterranean and Britain during the Neolithic period. One researcher said the findings suggest a complex web of interactions between early farmers across Europe. The researchers published their findings in the journal Nature. Number 9. The Welsh Connection. While the Italian theory has been making the rounds recently, a new study suggests that the Stonehenge builders may have actually hailed from Wales. Researchers analyzed human remains found at the prehistoric burial site of Bryn Celyn and compared the ancient DNA with more recent Welsh populations. They found that the DNA of the people who built Stonehenge matched closely with that of modern-day Welsh people, suggesting that they came from the same population. But how did they get from Wales to southern England? The researchers suggest that the people who built Stonehenge likely used boats to get there. They would have sailed across the Bristol Channel to reach the coast of Wiltshire where they constructed the monument. The reason why they chose this spot is because the land was rich in resources like timber and fertile soil, not to mention its proximity to the sea. Archaeologists already knew that the builders of Stonehenge probably came from Wales because the bluestones at the monument are made from a rock type called dolerite, which can only be found in Prehistory, a mountain range in southwest Wales. The people who built Stonehenge must have quarried the stones and then transported them over 140 miles to the construction site. But how they managed to move these huge rocks has always been a mystery. It's thought that they may have used logs as rollers to slide the stones along the ground. Another idea is that the builders built a kind of stone boat to float the stones across the Bristol Channel. If this is true, then the people who built Stonehenge were much more advanced than we previously thought. They would have needed to work out how to float heavy rocks in order to do this. No. 8. The Mysterious Bronze Age. Archaeologists haven't been able to determine exactly when the Stonehenge builders lived because they predate the Bronze Age. There wasn't much left behind except a few pieces of pottery. But now scientists think they've figured it out. According to a new study, the builders lived sometime between 3,300 and 2,900 BC. Researchers came to this conclusion by analyzing the oldest pieces of British pottery ever found, including fragments from Stonehenge itself. The pottery dates back to the Beaker and the Windmill Hill cultures. These were the first known inhabitants of Great Britain. They arrived here after migrating from mainland Europe. They brought with them new technologies like farming and pottery making. Scientists analyzed the chemical makeup of the pottery and compared it to similar fragments found throughout Europe. They discovered that the Beaker people were more closely related to continental Europeans than to later British populations. This is because most of their pottery was imported from France, Germany, and northern Italy. Some of the Beaker pottery found in Britain actually came from the same kilns. But after the Beaker people came the Windmill Hill culture. They arrived in Britain around 2000 BC and quickly adopted many aspects of the Beaker culture, including their technology. It seems that the Windmill Hill people made their own pottery too, and it was quite different from the Beaker style. They preferred simple geometric patterns to the more ornate designs of their predecessors. 7. The Durrington Walls. The Durrington Walls are an enormous circular enclosure located just over half a mile north of Stonehenge. They were constructed during the late Neolithic period. The walls are nearly 400 feet thick, and the ditch surrounding them is 39 feet wide and 10 feet deep. Sometime during the Bronze Age, the ditch was filled in and the entire structure was converted into a settlement. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of more than 50 roundhouses inside the walls, as well as an animal pen, storage facilities, workshops, and a possible ceremonial area. This was one of the largest settlements in Britain during the Bronze Age, housing up to 500 people. But no one knows for sure why the builders of Stonehenge lived here. Some experts say the settlement might have been used seasonally, while others believe it was home to the ancestors of King Arthur's knights. There are no written records to tell us who lived here. But in 2011, a team of scientists extracted DNA from a skeleton found at the site. They identified the men whose bones they had found as a distant relative of King Arthur's legendary knights. His name was Kingston, and he had blue eyes and dark hair. He may have been the ancestor of the Knights of the Round Table. 6. Amesbury Archer. In 2002, archaeologists unearthed the skeleton of an elite Bronze Age warrior near Stonehenge. They called him the Amesbury Archer because his skeleton was found lying beside an arrowhead and a bow and arrow. He was originally buried at the center of a large circular ditch, but grave robbers stole his skull and one of his arms before he was given the status of a war hero. The archer lived 4,200 years ago and may have been the leader of a tribal army. Scientists learned all of this by analyzing his bones and the artifacts found with his remains. He had fought in many battles and received several injuries during his lifetime. When he died, he was cremated and placed in an urn made of fired clay. After further excavations at the burial site, researchers found two more skeletons. Both of these people had died violently. One had been stabbed multiple times, and the other had an arrowhead lodged in his skull. It seems as though the Amesbury Archer wasn't the only warrior buried here. Perhaps he died alongside his soldiers during a battle, and they were all laid to rest together. And now for No. 5. But first it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to our supporters for helping us make these videos. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. No. 5. The Kings. 3 men were buried as kings in the Stonehenge area. 2 of the men were buried at Durrington Walls, and the third was laid to rest near the River Avon. All 3 were given full warrior burials, meaning they were covered with valuable goods and surrounded by weapons. The first man was buried around 2400 BC with 12 axe heads, 6 complete and 6 unfinished. The second man was buried around 2200 BC with an array of weapons, including an axe, 2 daggers, and a sword. The third man was buried with even more weapons, including 10 spearheads, 13 arrowheads, 1 javelin head, and 2 daggers. He was also buried with an urn containing the cremated remains of another individual. It seems that during the Bronze Age, warriors were celebrated for their bravery in battle. They were considered heroes of the community. And when they died, they were honored with elaborate funeral rites. Each of these men was buried with food, too. The first man had bread, meat, cheese, and beer. The second man had bread, milk, and a special type of porridge. And the third man had bread, meat, and eggs. In addition to this, the last 2 men mentioned were buried with jewelry. Number 4. The Villages. Archaeologists have discovered 3 Neolithic villages near Stonehenge. 2 of the villages are located close to Durrington Walls, and the third lies along the River Avon. The villages date back to the period when Stonehenge was being constructed. It is thought that the people who lived here worked on the monument and possibly performed rituals in their fields. The villagers farmed the land and raised livestock, including cattle, pigs, and sheep. They also hunted deer and wild boar. One of the villages was inhabited for more than 300 years, from 3100 BC to 2800 BC. But the people didn't stay in one place for too long. They kept moving to new settlements as the climate changed and the land became less hospitable. The researchers say that by studying the material remains of daily life, we can learn about the values, beliefs, and behaviors of past societies. This is why they're so interested in the villages. By analyzing the artifacts found here, they can better understand the culture of the Stonehenge builders. 3. The landscape. When Stonehenge was built, it was surrounded by rolling farmland. But since then, the landscape has changed dramatically. Today, the monument is hemmed in by trees and bushes. It's hard to imagine that anything looked this way 4,500 years ago, yet satellite images and computer models suggest that this is exactly what the landscape looked like. Back then, the forest cover was sparse and the land was used primarily for agriculture. The area surrounding Stonehenge was part of a larger landscape that supported a large population of humans. There were settlements nearby, as well as a network of roads and paths. This allowed the people who built Stonehenge to travel easily throughout the region. They may have used the roads to visit other monuments like Salisbury, which is located just 17 miles away. In fact, the landscape surrounding Stonehenge is dotted with prehistoric sites, including burial mounds, standing stones, and a number of other monuments. It's possible that all of these sites were connected in some way. Maybe they were all part of a sacred landscape that was used for religious purposes. 2. The necropolis. Historians have discovered at least 17 cemeteries near Stonehenge. They call this area the Stonehenge necropolis because it contains so many human remains. Most of the skeletons found here date back to the Neolithic period. Some of the people were buried in individual graves, while others were laid to rest in communal pits. The bones of infants and young children were often placed in urns and buried beneath earthen mounds. Adults were typically buried with grave goods, including jewelry, ornaments, and tools. One of the most interesting burials comes from the Bronze Age. It dates back to 2000 BC and contains the skeleton of a man who had been stabbed to death. He was buried with a wooden bowl containing cremated human remains, an axe, 2 daggers, a bronze sword, and a shield boss. Another burial dates back to the Iron Age and contains the skeleton of a woman who had been decapitated. She was buried with an iron knife and a small axe. The most recent burial dates back to the Roman period. It contains the skeleton of a man who had been shot with an arrow. He was buried with a bronze disc and a pair of tweezers. It seems as though violence has always been part of human history. But why were so many people killed near Stonehenge? It's impossible to say. 1. The ancestors. The people who built Stonehenge are considered to be the ancestors of modern-day Britons. They migrated to the island from Europe around 4,500 years ago. They brought with them new technologies and ways of thinking that changed the course of British history. The ancestors of modern Britons were farmers, and they quickly began to transform the landscape. They cleared forests and created fields for crops. They also built settlements and established social structures. These people weren't just settlers, though. They were also spiritual beings who revered Stonehenge as a sacred site. They may have used the monument for religious ceremonies or as a burial ground. It's possible that they believed the stones had magical powers. Whatever the case, Stonehenge is a reminder of the deep history of Great Britain. It's a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of the people who built it. And it's a symbol of the country's cultural heritage. Thanks for watching. What other mysteries of Stonehenge would you like to see us cover? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time. Bye.